Hi, everybody. It's Michael Angelo Caruso with another Talk to Me podcast episode. I'm with Steven Clausnitzer today. How are you, Steven?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
We're going to talk about science fiction to some people today. We're going to talk about the reality of something that most people never dreamed would happen. And Steven's in the thick of it. He's doing a great service for people, in my opinion. And before we get started, I want to remind you, if you're watching the YouTube video of this, you can listen to all of the podcasts on audio on the Podbean and iTunes platforms. If you're listening to the audio format, you can watch the Michael Angelo Caruso YouTube channel. As always, comments, subscriptions, likes, forwarding, and sharing great information is always encouraged. You're going to want to listen carefully to this podcast. It's more technical than most. And you're going to want to share it with people because, Stephen, of all of the medical stuff that I've heard about in the last decade, this is the one that seems like it can really be a game changer for people. We're talking, ladies and gentlemen, about stem cell banking and then of course, eventually using those stem cells. For the uninitiated, what's going on at ForeverLabs? We'll first talk about the basic process, and then we'll get into why you guys are special. But for people that don't know what's happening with stem cell banking, how do you talk about it to the layperson?
Well, there's so many different ways that we've come up with over the last several years to try to communicate that message. And I think a really simple one is just saying it's stem cell time travel, right? So as you age, you lose stem cells. In particular, we're talking about mesenchymal stem cells. You lose them in number and function with age. They get worse and you have less of them. The older you get, the more they decline. And so what we'll do is we'll store your stem cells now. And whether you're 30 years old or 55, 60 years old, your stem cells right now are as healthy and as plentiful as they're ever going to be. So we'll store them now in liquid nitrogen. They literally don't age. 20 years will go by and you'll be able to draw upon younger Michael's stem cells, right? So that's what we do at ForeverLabs. We're a longevity company. You can think of it in two ways. I'm either going to use the cells I have banked, which I banked when I was 38 years old. I'm 44 years old now. I'm going to use them either to treat an age-related disease, which I'd prefer not to. I'd rather just not have an age-related disease, right? Or I'm going to do that. I'm going to use them to prevent age-related diseases. So I could go off on a tangent right now. I'm going to pause and wait for your questions. But in short, we'll bank your stem cells now so that you can use them later in life. There's a lot that I could go into to dive into the weeds, but I'll pause there.
That's okay. It's good. And I'm going to pause too, because I want everybody to think about this for a second, that there's something inside the younger version of you, today's version of you, that can be harvested. Do you use that term?
Yeah, we say collected, but that's accurate as well. Yeah.
I've heard people use pull stem cells. So whatever verb you want to use, they're being extracted from the body.
Yeah.
They're stored in liquid nitrogen for a period of time.
Yep.
Ideally, you'll never have to use them. This is interesting. But in case you do, this thing that we pulled from your body today will be useful to you in time travel. There's the time travel piece.
Yeah.
To heal. And what kind of things are we talking about healing?
So right now, it's interesting. Michael, when we started the company, there was around 200 clinical trials using these cells to treat various age-related diseases. We're talking about cardiovascular disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, osteoarthritis, et cetera. If you live long enough, you're going to have an age-related disease. It's inevitable. It's likely to be stroke, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, cancers, various cancers. Now I want to challenge something you said. So there was 200 when we first started. Now there's well over 1,000. So it's just the growth has been exponential. You said, hopefully you don't use these cells, right? Now I would challenge that and say, hopefully we get a chance to use them, but not to treat disease. I want to use my cells prophylactically. I want to use them to mitigate disease.
Yeah, good point. So I live with a redhead named Renee.
Okay.
She's the one, because every household has a first adopter, and I am not that first adopter in my home. It's Renee.
Yeah.
And she's reading about stem cells and how they can work and all this kind of thing. And one day she says, as partners do. She says, I made an appointment for us. And I said, what now? So we both went at the same time. Some people go for couples massages. We went for a couples stem cell collection.
That's awesome.
And that was when I experienced the process, which we'll get into in a second. But Renee, to her surprise, ended up using the stem cell process, the what do you call it when you reinsert the stem cells?
Yeah, so reintroduction of the cells, what they do is they'll concentrate all the mononuclear cells at point of care and introduce it into an area of injury or inflammation. Yeah.
Yeah. So she experienced the reinsertion a mere 2 years later. Now, a little caveat to that, they actually pulled fresh cells to do it. And Renee's not that old, but we'll get into that, the mechanics and the politics of that in a second.
Sure.
But she had a little bit of, she had some hip issues. And it turns out that after x-ray and a little bit of diagnostics and talking with doctors and so on, she had lost a significant amount of cartilage in her hip. So to your point, she could walk around with pain another 40 years. She's a young woman still. Or she could use this process, this amazing process to, I guess they're re-injected as they're put back in. It's done with a needle, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
And I can't explain it. People have asked what's happened. I can't really explain it. So this is
I'd be happy to talk a little bit about that. So what Renee had done is really, it's amazing. And it's not, maybe 10 years ago, it'd be more fringe. Now there are physicians all over the country that are using this process at major institutions. It's very, very well accepted. And what they're doing is they're doing it oftentimes in lieu of surgery. Like it sounds like Renee had. Sometimes they do it adjunct to surgery to help promote healing after the surgical process.
And in this case, the surgery might have been a complete hip replacement.
Exactly, right? That's it sounds like she's a young woman having a complete hip replacement. It's never any good, but it's certainly not when you're younger. So I'm glad it worked out for her. So what's happening though, Michael, is they're taking out Renee's bone marrow. And people, that's when your audience just cringed a little bit, right? And we'll get into it. It's really not that painful. We can talk about the process in a moment, but they take out the bone marrow and they concentrate all of the mononuclear cells in a centrifuge. And they take them and they introduce them to areas of injury. And those cells, what they do is, some of them will engraft right there. Some of them go into the bloodstream. But what these cells do, these mesenchymal stem cells in particular, a lot of doctors are calling them signaling cells now and not stem cells, because what they do is they give off of these extracellular vesicles, EVs, or you can call, a lot of people refer to exosomes. It's kind of the most, right now, medically relevant of these EVs is called an exosome. And what it does is it goes out into the body, into the bloodstream, and it goes to other cells, and it's like a little communication packet. It gives instructions to cells in your body. And it essentially says, hey, we've got a problem here in Renee's hip. Come to this area, help us with the healing process. So these stem cells that they introduce embed in the hip. They give off these extracellular vesicles, these communication packets that go out in the body, recruit other cells to the areas of injury and start coordinating the healing effort. And these cells decrease inflammation. They can help with tissue regrowth, et cetera. But it's really powerful stuff.
These are the kinds of, sorry, Steven, just to get my Flintstone brain around this, and this may help our listeners as well. White blood cells have been doing a similar mission trips for a long time. You have an infection in your arm and the white blood cells form a little army and they march over to the infection and they fix it. It's not unusual to have the helpers migrate to the area of injury. But what you guys are doing is you're mechanizing it somehow, or introducing or initiating this very unique process, right?
Well, what we're doing specifically at ForeverLabs is we're allowing you to essentially store the best version of that process for later. So in the future, when you're older and you want to have something like this done, your body's not think about this. Do you remember when you were a boy and you fell off your bike, you skinned your knee, and like a week later, the scab's gone and healed, right? Right now, if you or I fell off of our bike and did the same thing, we've got a scab there for 2 months, right?
Everything is slower now, Steve.
Everything. And it's not, it's because our body is not as adept at healing, because as we age, we have less of these cells and they are not as efficacious as they were when we were a boy. Okay. So you're storing that ability right now for future. That's what ForeverLabs does. Now, to your point about white blood cells, yeah, same similar concept. But what happens often in injury is those white blood cells and other inflammatory factors go nuts. They go out of control, and you've got this chronic inflammation in an injury area, and these stem cells will go to the area and help mitigate that inflammation and help coordinate the healing effort in a more effective way. So that's what Renee had done when she had those cells introduced there. It helped decrease inflammation in the joint, and hopefully she's doing much better now.
Yeah, she is much better. And it was like, it takes like, I think she was told 6 months for the entire process to play out, because something happens. There's the migration, then there's the healing, then there's the body getting used to the healing. There's all these things that have to happen in order for the healing process to finish. Hmm. Let's talk about the two processes separately, the collection first, and then the reinsert or the insertion. I've talked to other people since then that have had their stem cells collected. Mm-hmm. And for those of you that don't know what's happening here, I laid on a gurney. They did an ultrasound to determine where my nerves and bone would be, a good place for the needle insertion. Mm-hmm. And the doctor kept using the term pressure.
Yeah,
but I think it was another word for suction, because that's kind of what's happening. Is maybe pressure. Yeah, it's a hard thing to describe it, but he was trying to alert me to it, which I appreciated, because I'm laying on my back and
you don't know what's happening.
Yeah, and it wasn't. I wouldn't call it uncomfortable at all. It was a very strange sensation. I had never felt anything like it. The needle went into my buttocks, my upper buttocks. It takes just a few minutes to do this, not long at all, and. I've talked to people who were in quite a bit of discomfort. So they always say the pain scale, 1 to 10. I was probably a 3 or 4.
Yep. I gave it a 4 myself. Yep.
Okay. But apparently Renee felt had a different pain sensation on the re-entry.
Oh, sure.
7 or 8 maybe. Mm-hmm. But a lot less pain than hip surgery and the subsequent
and to be clear, ForeverLabs doesn't provide any medical treatments with the cells. All we do is bank them. So that was Dr. I think Thomas Nabedy probably did that.
Yes, in Rochester, Michigan, everybody, great doctor.
He is. That's all him, and he's phenomenal. I would recommend anyone to go see him. But yes. that's not under our umbrella as a company.
Yes. A guy like me, an end user, wouldn't actually interface with you until. Actually, ever. Even when I go get the cells, I got to get them through my doctor.
Well, your physician will request them, and you will request them through ForeverLabs, and then we send them anywhere that you'd like. We do ask that it's a medical clinic or an accredited lab, but we're not going to send them to your house. But we do send them anywhere that you request, and they belong to you. We're not trying to hold these things hostage. Anytime you want them, we will send them where they are needed. But yeah, I think the reintroduction of the cells is probably painful. You've got a chronic condition there already. My guess is it is. But yet the storage of the cells, taking them out, as you described, it is variable. Some people have said as high as a 7 on the pain scale. And the reason is when you're taking out the bone marrow, you're removing fluid from your bone and you're not replacing it with anything. So there's this negative pressure that's created. And most people get this sort of cramp that runs down their leg. It's very fleeting, lasts for a matter of seconds.
Yes.
And then it's gone. And most people just have a little sort of nickel-sized bruise on their hip.
Right.
Yeah. And that goes away, just like any bruise in a couple of weeks. But the biggest challenge we have as a company is not convincing people that it's a smart idea to bank your stem cells. I think any rational person sees the value in that. It's people get really worried about really the word bone marrow itself is just scary to people, because in the movies you see all these people getting a bone marrow aspiration, and it just it's not. There's a difference between a bone marrow aspiration and a bone marrow biopsy. A biopsy, they actually have to go in and they scrape some tissue, and it's much more invasive. What you had done is referred to as a bone marrow aspiration. It's basically an advanced blood draw. They're taking blood from your bone marrow. There's lidocaine used at the point of entry. So you really don't feel much of anything until they take out the bone marrow, and then there's that cramp. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes. Which, would you describe a spinal tap the same way?
No, no. And that's the thing too. People always often confuse it. People assume we're taking it from the spine. They're actually taking it from this area right here. It's not your buttock. It's right above it. It's called your posterior iliac crest, or PSIS. And it's just, it allows you to enter this large bone cavity there. And so you have a huge sort of like a well of bone marrow there. It's easily accessible. There's not a lot of nerve endings around there. So it's pretty safe, very safe. Really the thing that's the most that could happen is just like when you get blood, is right at the point of entry, an infection. And I'm going to knock on wood right now. We have never had an issue with infection.
Well,
So
Dr. Nabity was religious about.
he is.
The
They all are.
field or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So I should mention too that the physicians we work with by design, these are doctors that studied at Harvard, Stanford, Duke, Michigan. These are really, really well-trained physicians. So when you go to see a ForeverLabs physician, you know you're seeing a top doctor.
Let's move into that first adopter type of airspace, because there's a lot of challenges with being the first at something. There's an old, it's not really a joke, more of an anecdote. The question is, who was the second person to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean? And the answer is nobody cares, because Charles Lindbergh was first. He's the name everybody knows. Everybody forgot about this guy, Bert Hinkler, who was the second person, right? Poor Bert.
Yeah.
And when you're in technology like this, you want to be the first and you want to be the best, because you've got to be a standard bearer. You ruin it for everybody else. People are trying to understand right now the ethics of, there's like ethics around stem cell too, but I think it's a different kind of stem cell that people get confused, because when I posted this the first time on social, they're like, oh my God, you're breaking the law. But they were thinking about the stem cell application for babies, right?
They're thinking of embryonic stem cells. So these are stem cells that are that can be collected from aborted fetuses and things like that, which back in the, I would say, early 90s got a really bad rap and are really, really controversial. We have nothing to do with that. So these are they're your stem cells, literally from you.
That's controversial, because people in the I don't know, people can create their own version of babies and the perfect baby, and there's all this, I don't know.
Perhaps, I think it's really more controversial because people were upset about the origins of the tissue. The tissues were being derived from aborted fetuses in some cases. Yep. And obviously that's a pretty, polarizing thing. We have nothing to do with that. So what we do as a company, everything we do actually, so we have patents in other areas. We are largely a regenerative medicine company, not just stem cell banking. There's some other things we do, but all of what we do, all of our patents, all of our direction medically is all around leveraging your biology, your own biology for you. Does that make sense?
Of course. I'm going to go get an implant soon. And they told me that they're going to use PRP, which is spinning out my blood. And then when they, because it's a staged process, they're going to first they got to cut my gum, then drill the hole. The tooth is already gone, the bad tooth, then drill the hole. And then they're going to put my being, essentially a blood clot, over the wound and then suture it to let it heal. Mm-hmm. I'm giving you, again, the Flintstone version of this. But they used to use, before this came about, some sort of synthetic material to help the healing, but it had to be retrieved. So I think it's the same basic thing. It's always better to use that person's
biology. Yeah. And the reason being, so think about, you've heard, of course, of people needing to have a bone marrow transplant because they get a blood cancer. Yes. And in that instance, if someone does that, they have to find someone who's a match, an HLA match. And it could be a relative, it could be a stranger. But even if you have a 100% match with someone, there is still a 50% rejection rate. And the reason being is your body, your immune system sees these new cells as foreign and tries to eliminate them from the body, and you get graft versus host. And oftentimes that's actually what kills the cancer patient. Wow. Not the cancer, it's graft versus host. That's why it's really important to have your own biology set aside. So if let's say, God forbid, 10 years from now, you get a blood cancer, you have your own young Michael cells set aside. You could potentially be your own donor in that
Yeah.
situation. So
Yeah.
I can't overstate how important what we are doing is. I think it's a no-brainer. But a lot of people have a hard time getting past the medical procedure. They think it's going to be very painful.
Right.
And it really is not.
So a little wrinkle in what I thought was going to be the plan, because Renee got her stem cells collected a couple years ago. And then within 2 years, she's going to need them again. But she couldn't get them from her own stem cell bank for some reason. Do you know about this?
Yeah. So right now in the United States, the FDA won't allow you to take stem cells. So we're banking them at ForeverLabs, right? And the idea is we want to use these cells. And you can for, if it's a life-threatening condition, there's this law called right to treat, which will allow a physician to use a medical procedure that they deem safe and reasonable to treat that life-threatening condition. So, but if you want to use it for like the hip or something like that, right now, outside of an approved FDA trial, you're not able to use them. There's the rule essentially states that once these cells leave your body and leave the clinic and are frozen, they are regulated like a drug. Even though it's your biology and likely to be very, very safe, they're regulated like a drug. And right now there are approvals in other countries, but not yet in the United States to do that. So there's approvals in Canada, Japan, the EU. It's coming, but we're not quite there yet.
So this is another element of time travel, because we think everything comes in place at the same time, but legislature doesn't work like that. Education of the legislature doesn't work like that. The laws have to become voted. We just finished up with COVID, and people were frustrated, why can't we get our kids vaccines? It's because time has to pass in order to do enough science, in this case, a number of experiments, to prove that they're safe. And you can't rush those along, right? It's a time sequence. It's all spelled out. You might become frustrated with the length of time that it takes these people to get their shit together. But you're quite confident that it's coming, that somebody like Renee could get her stem cells back if it was not a life-threatening situation.
Yeah, I think it is coming. I can't make any promises, but this is my prediction. A lot of times what happens is there's off-label usage of certain medical procedures, et cetera. For example, you mentioned PRP of the gums that you're doing. The PRP devices, these machines that have 510K clearance from the FDA, they have 510K clearance from the FDA to be used in bone grafting. That's it. Like there is no 510K clearance for gum use or 510K clearance for using PRP in joints and knees. This is off-label usage by physicians. And it's largely established that that's okay. And they're not doing anything. I mean, these are major institutions. Like I guarantee, think of Duke Hospital is doing this. Everyone's using PRP right now. But that's just kind of the way it works, off-label usage. What I think is going to happen with autologous stem cell treatments is that there's likely to be something like osteoarthritis of the knee, or maybe osteopenia. Osteopenia, that's a good example. Osteopenia is a loss of bone density with age, right? The older you get, the less bone density you have. Your bones get brittle. It's being shown that if you reintroduce these stem cells, it does increase bone density.
Oh.
And so you get an approval for osteopenia. Well, it's something everyone has. Everyone's going to have with age. And so it sort of opens a door for procedures using these cells prophylactically. So I'm really rooting for that. It's because the day that we have that approval, we can start reintroducing these cells to treat osteopenia. But one of the byproducts of reintroducing these young MSCs, at least in animal models, is that they live longer, significantly so. So, I mean, it's why we started the company, actually. If you want to hear that story, it's pretty cool. So my co-founder is a guy named Dr. Mark Katakowski. Mark's phenomenal. He's been studying stem cells for like 30 years. And he was at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, Michigan for 20 years, studying various neuropathologies like stroke and TBI, using stem cells to treat these injuries in mice, basically. And what he started to see is like when he treated old mice that had a stroke with cells from younger mice that were genetically matched, not only did they heal faster, but they seemed to live longer than the control group. So Mark became convinced that having access to his own young stem cells was going to matter. And he called me up on the phone one night, very good friends. And he started telling me about this. And by the end of the phone call, I was like, man, I want to store my stem cells too. Let's do this. So we started to try to find a company that would store our stem cells for us. And it didn't exist.
What year was this?
This is, I want to say 2015, 2015. And then I reached out to a friend of mine who's an orthopedic surgeon, great doctor in Brighton, Michigan, actually named Dr. Laith Farjo. And I said, hey, Laith, I got a strange question. Would you take out my bone marrow and my friend's bone marrow? And he was like, it's not that strange. I do it all the time. To your point, things like Renee, right? And then he said something that made the entrepreneur light bulb go off. He said, and a lot of people are asking me if they can store some for later. And then I realized, well, maybe there are other people as crazy as me and Mark that would want to have this done, as you refer to us as early adopters, right? And so we started the company in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And before we knew it, like people from San Francisco started flying in, mostly from SF to Michigan to bank their stem cells with us and Dr. Farjo.
Why SF?
Very, very progressive, very forward-thinking futurists, a lot of futurists. So, there's no surprise to me that that's where all the new technology is born and where, cryptocurrency, all this new stuff that's coming, it's largely in the Bay Area that it's being dreamed up, thought up, and built.
Did they ask you if you accept crypto for payment?
No, we have had people ask that. I mean, yes, absolutely. And I am not opposed to it. So we had all these people flying out there, and then one of them invited us out to his big place out in San Francisco to give a talk. And Mark went and gave a talk out there, and it became evident that we needed to have a doctor in San Francisco. We brought one on board there, and all these tech CEOs started signing up, and we got asked to join this thing called Y Combinator, which is a tech accelerator out of San Francisco that has spawned companies like Airbnb, Dropbox, Reddit, Stripe, DoorDash,
Wow.
Instacart, like all these big companies. And we went through that program and got funded, and now we're in 20 states and off to the races. But it all started because Mark noticed when he was trying to study these mice that they were living longer than the control group. There are subsequent studies of people that were studying osteopenia in mice too, and saw that not only did it increase their bone density, but they lived like 30% longer than the control group with young MSC reintroduction. So imagine that. Like, imagine if you could start reintroducing young Michael's cells on a schedule and live 30% longer, not in a decrepit state, but in a healthy and vibrant state. I mean, it's really exciting. It's very exciting. But the thing is, like,
mice wouldn't have so much osteoporosis if they did more weight training.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah. Hey, look, I just started getting into that. I just started lifting weights like a month ago, and I feel
Good
great.
For you.
Yeah.
I hear, I don't know if it's true, that women tend to suffer from osteoporosis more than men. Is that true?
I don't know that. And I should also say I'm not a physician. So I run the company. I'm the CEO. Mark is the
What did you do
scientist
before
and
this?
CMO. Before this, I was always in business. I grew up sort of worshiping my grandfather, Jack Clausnitzer, and my grandfather, Pablo Ramirez, both entrepreneurs in Michigan that started their own companies. And I always knew I would start my own company. Before this, I started with Mark a website 15 years ago called hubski.com, which is, we call it a thoughtful web. It's a place where people go and discuss technology, even hot topics like religion, politics, science, art, music, but all in a thoughtful way. It still runs today. Check it out if you're online.
The thoughtful web versus the one that I currently use.
We all use, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just very entrepreneurial. Before that, though, even before that stuff, I worked at American Express. I was in business development on the merchant acquisition side.
Okay.
It's just like, leading sales teams and efforts. So for this company, though, it actually came in very much in handy. So a lot of what we have to do is go out there and grow markets, bring on new physicians, do a lot of marketing, things of that nature. So that's where my background came in handy. And then Mark's, of course, invaluable on the science side and medicine side.
So as CEO of ForeverLabs.com, how many people do you have employed these days?
Not a lot, honestly. So our team's relatively small. We have 3 in the lab, and 10 full-time employees
Oh, wow.
at the company, but we have, I don't know, 60 contracted physicians across the country. And then we will do some marketing and PR efforts outside of the company and hire vendors for things like that.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty small staff. Like in the lab, it doesn't take a lot of people to process these. And we store them in an outside laboratory called Brooks Life Sciences. They're phenomenal in Indianapolis. The storage facility, like you said, liquid nitrogen, but they're literally shielded from background radiation, which at that temperature is about the only thing that could age them. They're shielded from that. They're stored in a way that if they're retrieved, if your cells are retrieved, they don't have to open up a tin to go out and grab them, which would also lower or raise the temperature and potentially compromise them. There's a mechanical arm that goes down there and grabs them. And it's just wonderful stuff. They also produce their own liquid nitrogen right on site. So if there is ever a power outage or anything like that, they have plenty of nitrogen there. And it's a great spot. So we don't need to have a tremendous amount of employees on staff because we outsource a lot of the process. We process the stem cells. That's really important to have a solid team in the lab that processes them in an effective way. In fact, you may notice one of the things we do, which I think is really cool, is once your stem cells are processed, we'll literally take a photograph of them and send them to the clients, and they can take a.
It was so cute. I got a photo of my stem cells.
Yeah, we call it a cellfie, CELLFIE.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
You know, we should name the stem cells. You know, give them a cute name or something.
That's like 1 billion of them, but
I noticed you're not writing that idea down.
No, I put it up there.
Oh yeah, you remember it later. Yeah.
But yeah,
let's talk about money, because I know people are interested. I know
Sure.
there's probably different rates, but I'm sure there's some way to give people an idea what they're in for. And while you're giving this explanation, I never thought of this, but of course it has to be true. As someone who has banked my stem cells, I actually pay rent on the damn thing. Monthly, I think, is the charge.
No. It's
No?
annually. Just once a
Annually,
year.
okay.
That's it. Yep.
All right. But
It's not a lot.
it's what?
It's really not a lot.
It's not a lot certainly relative to having hip surgery or, you know, something that's going to save your life. What price would that be?
Exactly.
Tell us about the numbers.
Sure. So the annual storage plan is once a year, you pay $250. That's it on the anniversary date of the procedure. So it's a small amount, but the procedure itself is $2,500. So $2,500, and there's often promotions and things of that nature, but $2,500 and then $250 once a year. That's called the annual plan. And that $2,500 covers the procedure, the processing of the cells, sending them to storage, all of that. The other plan is called the lifetime plan, which is $9,000, but you never have to pay that $250. It's like I think a 25, 30-year break even, something like that.
Yeah.
Most people opt for the annual plan, but some people are just really don't ever want to have to think about it again, and they'll sign up for the lifetime plan.
Yeah.
It's funny, when we first started the company, one of the first things like this that we did was an NPR interview. And they asked us, back then we were charging $5,000, you know, for this. And they were like, are you afraid that you're creating an elite class of, you know, citizens that are going to have access to something that others don't? And, you know, Mark and I both come from middle-class backgrounds, and I wasn't super interested in doing that. So we have worked really hard to get our, using economies of scale to get our costs down significantly. So we've gotten it down to $2,500 for people to sign up.
Good for you. I hope you make a lot of money. I hope, more importantly, I hope you help a lot of people. And I'm doing my part to talk it up, and
Thank you, Michael.
this will hopefully explain to people how it worked. It occurs to me, we left a little bow untied earlier.
Yeah, go for it.
So we said Renee had her cells collected, but then she couldn't get them from the bank. How did she solve her hip problem? They drew the cells again, or they collected the cells again from her hip,
Yep.
spun them out, and then re-injected them. We didn't use you, I guess, in that process, correct?
No, you didn't. And look, if you bank your stem cells today, and then 2 years from now, you wanted to use them, I always tell people why, because it would be like starting, you know, an IRA, and then in 2 years withdrawing the funds. Like the real value comes when the delta between when you banked and when you reintroduce is there. So when your cells that you make are 10 years younger than you, they're likely much more efficacious than what's still circulating in your body. But if
Yes.
they're only 2 years younger, that delta isn't really great enough, in my opinion. You might as well just do a draw, do it right there at point of care.
Yeah. Well, it's ForeverLabs.com, everybody. We've been speaking with Steven Clausnitzer. He's not only a good guy, he knows what he's doing. The process is worth looking into. Neither of us are doctors, but we both have definite opinions about stem cell, the usage of stem cells to ward off serious illness, to also actually live longer, correct?
That's my hope. Yeah. And we're working hard on it. I want to say one last thing, if I could.
Sure.
You mentioned you hope we make a lot of money. Of course, our investors do as well. I want everyone to know that we are very much mission driven. I'm doing this to solve a problem. And we are. So look into it, reach out to us. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Thank you very much for the time today. I appreciate you and best of luck.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Bye.